the issue came to light that RIK had a book, and I believe it is assumed that the book is part of the Ministry of Education's curriculum, which, from what I understand, has been denied directly by the minister. And others on social media who have pointed out the fact that, well, no, there were no curriculum changes for the year, as one of our colleagues pointed out here in WESN. So doesn't know why people think they're trying to sneak this book in all of a sudden. But the broader issues that the book raised, I think, is something that we have not discussed in this country really. And I do believe that it is valuable to discuss it because it's playing out in North America. And, you know, we kind of like to look at North America and then bring things down from there, whether it is appropriate or not. And it would be good to get ahead of it as opposed to just allow internet trolls to bring whatever they want down and cause confusion here. So to me, the wider situation is the questions with regards to, because it's not about the LGBTQ part of it for me. For me, it's about the exposure of children to sexual content, right? And when is it appropriate?
Right.
And I would argue that to some extent, and I won't fault parents for this, because, and maybe this is just how I was raised, and not everybody's going to be raised like me.
Say what you said, okay.
Right?
You said you don't believe.
I don't believe
yes,
for minors to be exposed to sexual content.
Right, that's what
you said. At least in general, right? I don't like that at all.
Right.
Like, sexual identity is not something I think, I don't know how many 6, 7, 8-year-olds when I was growing up was grappling with those issues.
But Sean, no, what you said off is you don't believe that minors should be exposed to sex, because the topic is sex education.
Well, yes.
That's what you said, and yes. I oppose that view. I believe sex education should start, because you use single digits, so you mean like 6, 7.
I mean,
but
by teenage years,
no, but there are age-appropriate ways to introduce sex education to a child from as little as 5, because, okay, the internet is not always the place of truth. But I've read many stories where mothers on certain forums would come and say that their child as young as 5 have asked them questions pertaining to simple questions. Where did my brother and sister come from? Giving them an age-appropriate answer to that is sex education. So I think when people hear sex education, and you even use the example about identity, that is not what broadly sex education is about.
Okay, right.
So I would say there is an age-appropriate way to introduce sex education to children as you go along. Of course, the argument will be made, whose role is that? Is that the role of the parent? Is that the role of the school? Some people feel you should leave it to the parent to introduce their child to whatever they feel as the parent is appropriate for their child. I have no problem with that. I understand that. But we also have to understand that many children grow up in homes where their parents neglect that duty. Mm-hmm. Now, I was fortunate. At the age of 9, my mother did sit me down and have a discussion about what the changes that you go through as you get older. Menstruation, I could say that word on TV, yes, because I know we're often hesitant about using these words. Had a discussion about that, use of sanitary napkins, when you change, what can happen, if good touch and bad touch. But that was probably when I was younger. But these are things a child should know about. Sex education doesn't have to be about explaining sexual acts. So it's about awareness.
Now, granted, a lot of my concern, because I think while you have your opinion on what sexual education is, I think that activists in certain jurisdictions will want to go further than you. So that's one of the things that I'm concerned about. But the other thing is this, because now, granted, for boys, puberty is different than for girls, right? So, and maybe that's part of why my upbringing feels different. My experience just feels different to me, because I don't think either of my parents had any sort of talk with me.
Well, I had a discussion about my husband, because, you know, he's a man, so I wanted to get his perspective, and he said his parents gave him a book at the age of 12, but he was saying, if my mother-in-law is listening to this, that the book was, actually the book was a bit juvenile, but because by the time he had gotten the book, he would have already gotten a lot of that information from his peers, and that is the problem. It is better for someone, a responsible adult, be it your parents or a teacher in a curriculum that has been discussed and agreed and set to give you that information than you hear erroneous information that you pick up from your peers. And now we're in an information age. Children as young as 5 have cell phones. A lot of their parents don't know about child lock. So the children are being exposed to information more than parents seem to accept. Because even at that age, he was like, well, he knew a lot of that already. So that's why I believe it should, as the child grows, primarily the parents should give them appropriate information.
Well, I mean, the question I would have would be, you know, when did he and his peers, did they talk about it at 11? Did they talk about it as young as 7? You know, when?
Well, I didn't
right.
it. But come on, Sean.
No, because,
let me ask you then,
because again, 12 is not single digits. 12 is you're almost a
12
teenager.
is not single digits.
Right?
But, okay, well, I don't want to get too personal with you on the TV to tell me when were you exposed to any notion of, well, sexuality and sex? If you can remember, and who exposed you to it?
I would assume that I would have been somewhat exposed because, you know, watching foreign TV stations,
Right.
like the old school, when there was one HBO and one Cinemax and one Showtime, right? So at some point now,
Yes.
say you're watching the Sylvester Stallone or Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, and there's varying degrees depending on the movie,
Yeah.
you know, Hollywood movies at
Yeah.
the time would have a sex scene because
Right.
the male lead and the female lead, whatever.
Right.
Of course now, depending on the movie, it might just be you see nothing and then they just close the door after kissing,
Right,
or they
right.
might be
A little
half naked,
more.
right? You don't know.
Right.
But of course, the parents will be like, why look at this? I mean, that's the thing. I don't even remember because it's not as though at 4 years old I was
Yes.
like watching stuff like that.
And do you know
So I
there
don't
are
know
children
what,
at 4 years old who are exposed by, unfortunately, parents or relatives, or they go by the neighbor.
yeah,
and these are the
but then
things.
those, here's the thing though, that I don't think, because that is like the worst case scenario.
Right,
That,
it is.
And I don't think that the standard should be determined on the worst
No,
case
no, no.
scenario.
So I'm saying the children are now exposed to inappropriate information, and they have not been given an opportunity to get exposure to the correct age-appropriate exposure. But the thing is, some children are being groomed. So if the child knows
Yeah.
nothing, they won't even realize that something is wrong here. They might innately feel it. But if there was a discussion to them about don't let people touch and use the correct words, not these words we use, children are smarter than we think. And we can do it, as I said, in an age-appropriate way to prevent them from falling actually into danger.
Right, but I think a lot of the time, at least back in the day when I was small,
I think we were small around the same time.
I was small a little bit earlier than you. But anyway,
Yes.
I think parents it would have been more of a way, okay, what is the minimum amount of information I could give that would satisfy their curiosity, give them an answer that they could accept, but not venture into an inappropriate path that they're not mature enough to deal
Yes.
with. But also two, I don't necessarily want the child to now like get even extra curious about this thing that at the end of the day, a 7-year-old does not actually, because what you're saying is outside of these bad circumstances where things go wrong and they're interfered with, or they're just curious. They don't need this information on a practical level, or they're not supposed to need it.
They don't need it as a practical level. But
No. To be fair to you, there will be some situations where, you know, the child was interfered with, abused. Now they need some sort of education so that they could better grasp what happened to them, so that they could have a healthy response to it. But outside of that, an 8-year-old is not really supposed to need sexual...
Well, as I said, again, again, the definition of sexual, because, you know, young girls as young as 8 begin their monthly cycle. So we can't, again, you can't, I've heard stories of young girls, it happened to them, they don't know what happened, and they're scared, it's a whole turmoil. Again, if they were introduced to it slowly, given enough information, if something happened. So sex education doesn't have to be about engaging in sexual activity, just understanding the changes of the body. Certain things, there's a difference between boys and girls.
Right,
you know.
But then now, to me, they are different. To some extent, a lot of ideological debates come down to semantics and what you think, or definitions. One of those two things or both, right? So what you think is sex education.
I think
and
that's
how do you
part of the
define it.
problem.
That's
Yeah.
part of the problem. Because at some point, girls being educated about the changes in their body, because at some point they're going to actively have a physical situation that they have to, you know, it's not a choice. You know, it's not a maybe. right? It's not a preference that they get to have. You know, it's going to happen, and in a few rare cases it does not happen, and then that might be a whole other set of questions, right? At some point later down the line. But there are other topics with sex education that is more containing to me.
But
right?
you know, we've been focusing a lot about its parents. What about, I think the issue was, how much of this should they be exposed to in schools?
Yes, and I made the statement when it was more limited to the book, that in general, those aspects, so sexual relations, and I think sexual identity and sexual preference, right? I don't even know if I want the Ministry of Education to touch this with a 10-foot pole. Maybe for secondary schools, right?
Schools.
But in primary schools, I don't think this is a thing this should not be a thing. I do not have faith in the Ministry of Education to even attempt to do this in a responsible and manner that's not going to cause some issue.
Well, right, but so that takes me, last night on Trinity TV, the Archbishop, he apparently appears on the shows called Shepherd's Corner or something every day. And the topic last night was the education. I can't remember the exact topic, the name, but it's about partnership in education. So his main theme was that in education, there needs to be a partnership between the ministry, the parents, and because he's the Archbishop, the denominational board.
Right.
So when I think about the Ministry of Education forming a curriculum, I don't think they're forming a curriculum in isolation. I believe, or I would hope, there would be a discussion with the denominational boards, some way to have a discussion with parents, National Parent Teachers Association or something like that, and the ministry, so that we have a curriculum that is acceptable by the majority. No, there will always be a minority. Nothing will be satisfied to them. Some people, as maybe like you, they don't believe schools should touch sex education in any way at all. But I do believe the ministry would not do this in isolation. And do you know there's actually a health and life education curriculum available for government secondary schools where sex and sexuality is one of the topics?
So here's the thing, and I think this is where it is fair for the ministry for a topic like this, right? Say, well, okay, if the denominational schools don't want to do it, we could still decide to do it for the schools that we have direct authority
and they
over,
have the health and family life curriculum.
That's one. Two, I think in teenage years now, it would be very naive to think, well, teenagers don't have sex, they're all celibate. No, and they're not going to have questions, even if they're not sexually active.
Yeah.
They're not going to have questions and want to know, because at the end of the day, you know, I think it would be irresponsible now. And your point where some parents kind of like leave that responsibility alone, right? I think, yes, at secondary school level, that should be where it should be considered for some of the more heavier sexual topics. But my concern is it's spilling the heavier stuff, not the stuff that kids might need to know as things are changing and, you know, so they could understand. So I'm talking some of the more relation stuff, you know, like that's spilling in. The book itself was not that bad. I'm like trying to tell people, look,
you've read?
To be fair, what I've heard about the content of the book is not that bad. However, it doesn't take much for that book to turn into a worse book.
But then,
right?
It's now you're using good book and worse book, you know.
I know,
you've offended a segment of the population. But my thing is, on the book side of the discussion, a lot of the people who are arguing about these books don't go in bookstores, and when last they go there, they only go when it's July, August to buy school books.
That is the irony.
And I am like, why are you all arguing? You would have never seen this book if somebody hadn't snapped a picture, because you don't go there.
The irony is, we have to go, but the irony is, it's very doubtful that, at least in TNT, I don't know how many kids read books anymore.
Kids read books, but it's the parents who are, the kids are not going to buy the books for themselves. One is the parents, and the parents barely going in the store. But I mean, I see we're out of time. There's so much to say about the topic. I'm surprised we barely scratched the surface.
Yes, this is a big topic, but I would just like to, again, I'll end this here by saying, folks, those who are panicking about this and are all up in arms, don't be. We ain't there yet. We ain't there yet, right? Don't panic. Don't panic, please. Be responsible, and let's not have the haterade come out and, you know, insulting language and hateful language comes out as part of the discourse. That is not helpful. But we have to end things there. Janelle, thank you for joining me. Another riveting intellectual discussion once again.
Thank you for having me once more.
Well, sorry. I think I said thank you for coming.
I would still say thank you for having me. I'm still holding on to last week when the man was like, get some new guests.
He didn't mean you.